Welcome everyone to the Montessori Family Life series. We're so happy that you all are here today. There seem to be lots of you. Thanks for coming. We have a great broadcast for you today. So Tanya Reiskind is the Associate Head of Newgate School here in Sarasota, Florida, where I live and where Jonathan is residing at the moment. And she is doing a great job during this time in our lives when things are all sort of upside down. So we really appreciate her work that she's doing with the families and the children at Newgate School. Jonathan is also our guest today, and Jonathan Wolf is usually in Seattle, however, working with a school there. However, since we have changed and all shelter at home, he has come to Florida and has been living in amongst us for the duration of the pandemic so far. And he is a very talented presenter. He does conference presentations and he speaks internationally to schools. He's also a teacher educator, as is Tanya, and as am I. So I'm glad that I have both of my good friends and colleagues here today. I'm going to turn it over to you, Tanya and Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Lorna. And I just want to highlight that the Newgate School is the lab school of the Montessori Foundation. And that's why we're all together and we work together as a team in support of these fabulous projects. So today, Jonathan and I are going to talk to you a little about the language of empathy and how our work came about is because of the consulting that Jonathan and I do with schools all around the world. We go into environments, we coach teachers, and we coach leaders, school leaders. And one of the things that Jonathan and I have become really passionate about is the language that we use. And the language we use at home needs to work in consort with the language we use at school and vice versa, because one of the things that children need most now is consistency among us. And so on next slide, and Jonathan.
Yeah, several years ago, this wonderful poem appeared in, I think it was the New York Times Magazine, but it seems to speak to what we're all going through now in this period of social isolation and social distancing. So Vikram Seth writes, "All you who sleep tonight, far from the ones you love, no hand to left or right, and emptiness above. Know that you aren't alone, the whole world shares your tears, some for 2 nights or 1, and some for all their years."
That's a powerful poem.
Yeah, that's so timely, huh, Lorna?
Yes, for sure. Shall I go to the next slide?
Yes, please. I think that the poem sets the tone for this. The language of empathy comes from the heart, and it comes from a place where we want to sometimes walk. And in order to walk in another one's shoes, we ask you to reflect and imagine and observe. How did your child or the children in your home or staying in place, what shoes were they wearing just 2 months or 3 months ago? Imagine what they were doing. And then I like to invite you to imagine, what are they wearing now? What are they walking in? Are they wearing the same shoes that they went to school in? Or like my family, are we mostly wearing slippers? Think about what shoes we have. And then what shoes do you think they'll be walking in the future? And if we can look at empathy as building on this ability to imagine and observe and understand the feelings and the experiences of the shoes that they used to wear, the shoes they're wearing today, and the shoes they're going to wear, then we can start to explore how we approach empathy in our own language and our own thoughts.
Hey, Lorna. So I'd like to I'd like to ask you to simply do just a little reflective exercise, which you can see here. I'd like to invite you to recall a time when you observed or experienced a moment or an act of empathy. This could be one that you initiated. It could be one that you observed in another human being, a child or an adult, but it was truly an empathic act. And then once you recall that particular moment of empathic behavior, I'd invite you to ask yourself, what made the experience or observation so impactful, so poignant? What did the person who was exhibiting empathy, what did they do that made it empathic, and what was the effect upon another human being? So just take a moment to think about that, and then if anybody would like to share the thing that made it so special, what made it empathic. We're unfortunately don't have the time to hear everybody's wonderful story of empathy, but we'd love to hear from a few people about what was it that this person did that made it empathic. What did they say in language that created empathy? Just take a moment. When you're ready, share your thoughts on what it was that made it empathic. So I'll just share a little example of this, and hopefully that will give people some time to think about what they'd like to share something also. This is a story that probably could only happen in a Montessori school, but I think it's a rather poignant story. A 5-year-old was overheard giving a 4-year-old a tutorial on the nature of the number 0. Now, 0 is a very abstract concept for a preschool child. Any child under 5, you can hold 1, you can hold 2 things or 3 things, but you can't hold 0 because there's nothing there. So this 5-year-old is saying with great energy, listen, my friend, 0 has nothing. 0 has absolutely nothing. And the 4-year-old sort of softened their face and said in response to the 5-year-old, that's not really fair. We should let the 0 take something home today. So, only in a Montessori school would a child have empathy for 0, that we're not going to have any zeros in the world. Any?
I don't have any so far.
All right.
Lorna, how about you? Do you have a moment in time or a?
Yeah, thinking sometimes, sometimes silence is a very empathic thing to do, or body language. And so I remember at my mother's funeral service, I was sitting next to my aunt, who is elderly, and this is her sister. My mother was her sister. And she and I just reached over to each other and just held hands. And it's very touching.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember a child watching another child cry I wasn't aware of the reason. I was just observing from a distance, and I saw the walking child go to the tissue box, pull out a tissue, walk by the crying child and just drop the tissue. Never said a thing, just dropped the tissue. And I think that power of action and silence is also language that we, our nonverbal cueing in language is so powerfully important.
Mm-hmm. I see here that we do have one. When I click on it, it's probably going to change the screen. And again, everybody, don't worry about that. I'll just get it back when I've read the question, okay? It says, my daughter, let's see what that says. It says, my daughter shared a space with a classmate that was very frustrated. She didn't say anything. She placed her hand on her shoulder and just listened without judgment or words. Nice.
So one of the things that makes these 4 vignettes impactful and poignant is selfless, non-judgmental, introspective. So John, I think we could go to the next slide.
Okay,
You
just
can-
one quick thing
Yeah,
on
you can- I do have 2 more,
Go ahead,
Great.
Lorna.
if
Great.
you'd like to hear them. Okay, let me see this one. One of the most impactful moments was when I did missionary work in Albania, when I saw how the woman who manages the orphanage deal with with families in the community. It was incredible. And then we have one more. My friend, who is also my partner in my work, said, instead of saying sorry, say thank you.
You know, Tanya, you used the word in looking at the elements of empathy, selfless. And what occurred to me as you were saying that is that empathy truly is being with the other person, witnessing the other person's needs and feelings. It's not a projection of my emotions or my needs or my discomfort. It's really being in the shoes of the other person. I think sometimes it's easy to exhibit what we think is empathy, but it's really our own self-soothing or taking care of ourselves. It's really not about the other person. It's about our discomfort.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, you bring up such a great concept of mutual
I
empathy.
froze.
You're fine.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Keep
So
talking.
yeah, mutual empathy is also very powerful. So we can go on to the next slide. Jonathan, you're here.
Yep. Okay.
So yeah.
Go ahead, Tanya. I think that's you.
So what invites empathy? What inhibits our ability to be empathic? What kinds of things, thoughts or feelings or attitudes or mindsets inhibit our ability? For me, it's interesting that there are times in my life where I've been in a city and I've walked by homeless people, and I've bent down and said hello or put coins in the jar. And then there are other times where I walk past them and don't see them. You know, that's a very stark example from the same person, because I think each of us are capacity to be very empathic, but we also have times and places and spaces where we're probably not showing our most empathic self.
Can you hear me, Tanya?
Yes.
The internet's going a little bit in and out here at the high school. For me, empathy sometimes is inhibited by my anxiety, you know, a feeling of fear or a feeling of frustration, you know, a negative emotion, because this is again about my needs not being met, blinds me to really seeing what the other person needs or what the other person is asking of me. So I think any kind of strong negative emotion can inhibit empathy.
For me, sometimes I think it's choosing not to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Tanya. It has to do with vulnerability.
And I wonder, go ahead, John.
Let's drill this down for a moment to parents with children, since this is a broadcast for parents. You know, we're speaking, you know, about sort of psychological qualities. I know with my daughters, I had to ask myself sometimes when they did something that was a misbehavior, and I'm starting to respond, is like, am I really coming now from a place of meeting their needs and trying to understand why they're frustrated or why they're misbehaving or what they need to learn? Or am I simply projecting my own frustration with them? So I think part of empathy with children is this: in my response, is my response going to be about my emotions, or is it going to be about my child's needs? And that's what Montessori called the spiritual preparation work of the adult. We first need to sort of clear out our baggage, and then we can respond, as she said, with charity toward the child.
Lorna, when you thought of vulnerability, what
Yes.
came to you, what resonated with you? What came to mind for you?
Well, I think that sometimes I may not be empathetic with people because it really it almost forces you into a relationship with them. And sometimes we don't want to be in relationship with other people, or we're afraid to be, because then we have to be really authentic and open and may feel somewhat vulnerable.
And I wonder if that, it's not that we don't want to be in relationship with our children, but that sometimes we bounce between the type of relationship we are having with our children. You know, and I'm specifically thinking as they get older, or if they're adolescents, what kind of vulnerabilities are we willing to share with a 9 or 10-year-old that we had no problem when they were 4 or 5? And for those of you who have multiple age children in the family, sometimes being empathic with one child, I can quietly hear one of my children going, "How come you did it that way for him and you didn't do it that way for me?" Well, I can only walk in one pair of shoes at a time. I mean, I wonder if that's part of a vulnerable position to be in as a parent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I want to go back to Jonathan when he was also talking about, is it about the children's needs or about our own needs? And I often tell parents the thing that's most important to do before you interact with children, especially if it's an emotional situation, is to detach. And detaching doesn't mean that you don't love your children. It just means that you're not personally involved in whatever they are feeling or experiencing. You can kind of step back a little bit from it so that you can really listen and really pay attention to what they are feeling and so forth. So I think that's important to remember as parents. It's hard to detach sometimes because we are so close, of course, to our children.
Well, and Lorna, you bring up such an important point because, I mean, you know, 6 months ago, if children were in a grocery store acting out, the relationship might be, you know, the adult might say their own speak is, I'm embarrassed, you know, I need this. But now parents are in their home, stay at home situations, and they're starting to see behaviors that they don't recognize from their children because of the stress or the strain or whatever might be going on. We all are in a different world. And
Yeah.
so that vulnerability as well, I mean, parents are trying to juggle, you know, cooking, working, taking care of kids, making sure things get done, the dog gets a walk, whatever it may be. And they have to keep, as my dad used to say, keep a straight face. And, you know, sometimes we can't anymore. We just can't. We have to look at our children and say, you know, mommy's sad, being empathic almost with self-empathy so that the children can be, so we model the behavior for the children so that they can too show some level of empathy and engagement.
Yeah, I think piggyback on that, Tanya, is I think the idea of we're going to lose it at this time with our children because it's such a stressful time for parents. The question is, do we lose it and then blame our children for making us, you know, you made me angry, that kind of behavior? Or do we apologize and make amends and tell our children, you know, I really lost my temper there. I'm sorry. I'm going to work on being calmer. And I'd like you to work on this behavior. So it's having the humility and vulnerability to actually apologize to children. And I've seen adults do that with 3-year-olds, and that creates a very emotionally safe space when an adult apologizes.
John and Tanya, I also, it makes me think about parenting partners as well, that sometimes when we're in situations like we are now, we're all under a lot of stress and strain, we get really testy with our parenting partners. And we need to remember to be empathetic to them, and hopefully that they would be empathetic to us in the situation that we're in now. And again, that's modeling for the children, you know,
Yeah.
how to be in relationship, how to be empathetic.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can go to the next slide, but I want to follow up on that point, Lorna, as well, because I think when we use the word child and parenting, we are talking about a relationship of adults with younger people. But I also think that certainly during this particular time, you know, we all have an inner child too that we have to take care of and be respectful of. And so, you know, it brings to mind, you know, we have to keep our sense of humor. So if you have 4 people in a family, 2 adults and 2 children, that actually means that you have 6 children in the household.
Oh boy.
I resemble that remark.
I knew you would. So John, talk to us a little bit about this slide and why you and I really chose to express this kind of inquiry for us.
Well, you know, as Tanya and I were thinking about empathy as a parent with our children, you know, there's how empathic is my personality? Am I a feeling person? Do I walk in other people's shoes? But then there's the situational part of this, the environment. So I'd like to invite you to think about, and we're not going to ask anybody to report this because this is private, this is not a confessional, but this might be healthy to do. I'd invite you to think about and maybe have a discussion with your caregiving partner and other people in the family who are caregivers. In what situations do you tend to express empathy with your child, where you can be non-judgmental, empathic? And are there situations where something happens that really presses your button and you have a certain pattern of going to reaction or judgment or shaming language, like I'm disappointed in you, where you lose that sense of empathy because it's situationally challenging for you? So I think it would be healthy for adults, especially in these times, all pushed together as a family during COVID-19, to think about, in these times I'm calm and empathic. In these situations, I tend to lose it and jump to some kind of judgment, and that will enable us as parents to maybe reboot some of those situations and respond in more feeling empathic ways.
I have another comment here, which is a nice one. I remember when I was young and my mom gave me a good whooping for something I had not done. Upon realizing her mistake, she apologized to me profusely. This is like 40 years ago in an African culture where the adult is never wrong.
Wow.
To this day, I remember her humility, and this has made me a good parent. Humility, John, you got it right.
Wow, incredible story.
Yeah.
Children remember those moments of extraordinary character on the part of the adult. They remember more those kinds of special behaviors more than anything else in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So empathic language, I'm going to read
That's
it.
you, Tanya.
Yep, I'm going to read it. Empathic language emanates from the intention of wanting to understand what the other person is experiencing. It is not judgmental or rule-based. It is not about right or wrong. And I'd like to highlight the wanting. There's a desire here. There's an internal conscious choice of wanting to be able to understand. This is a very subtle difference than wanting to help. Okay, so wanting to help, sometimes we have people in our lives when things go wrong, they want to jump in and fix it. And that is not being empathic. Empathic is the desire and the intention. So it's choice. We have a choice to want to understand. And so what we're really looking at here is in moments of stress or moments where we're having a crucial conversation with a child or anyone in our lives, do we have the ability to take a pause and ask ourselves, do I want to be right, or do I want the two of us to be happy? Today I shared a quote with some people, and happiness is a destination. It's not a place. And so if empathy is a choice, can we really, and Lorna teaches positive discipline and has already alluded to the fact about detachment. And again, detachment takes a real conscious effort of pause and internal reflective behavior and so empathy, we're finding out that our neurons in our brain change when we pause and ask ourselves to contemplate the feelings and intentions of others as well as ourselves. Do we want to be right? Do we want to be winners? Or do we want to all find the winning place of joy?
Beautiful.
Yep. Okay. Is this me, Tanya?
It sure is.
Okie doke. So just to piggyback on what Tanya said, so taking a pause will only work if we ask ourselves the right question. And a couple good questions might be when we pause before we respond to our child's behavior, misbehavior, miscues is, am I losing sight of what my child needs because I am asking for their full attention or pressuring them for compliance? Children do need to give us their attention, and they do need to behave and do what we ask them to do. But if we jump to that too quickly, we lose sight of what's the child's unmet need. What is the learning that they need to learn? What is the skill they need to develop? Another wonderful question is, am I losing sight of what my child needs because I'm asking them to do something they don't yet know how to do? Does my child even have the skill to do this? Or do I just want to suddenly for them to do this? So those are two wonderful, when we do take a pause, as Tanya says, wonderful sort of speed bump questions to go, wait a minute, what's really important here first? Is it me understanding my child? Is it me preserving a trusting relationship with my child? Is it me just trying to get my child to do the right thing? Sometimes we as frustrated parents jump right to, I just want my kid to do the right thing. And what we've lost sight of is, why does my child not know how to do the right thing? And if I say it this way, is it going to hurt the trust and the relationship with my child?
And I'm going to pipe in here on the assumptions factor for parents, that we are so well organized in our culture to understand milestones and touch points of children. We know when the infant is supposed to sit up. We kind of understand when they're become verbal and those kinds of things for when they don't yet know how to do. I think it gets really squirrely as we approach our own children who are in adolescence. I think that adolescent parents have a gentler time with adolescents when they are starting to individuate and get into that role of conflict and confrontation, where the adult pauses and says, I see that you are practicing, but you're not yet there. Because adolescents, they leapfrog with their behaviors. They jump into things that they think they know how to do, and then they take two steps back. And so I always marvel at parents who talk about, their 11 and 12-year-old, the transitional child, and then the adolescent, the early adolescent, the 13, 14. They're just not behaving like they used to. And it's like, exactly. They're not supposed to.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. I think you said a really key thing. And ask yourself as a parent whether your child is 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 12 or 15. How often do you give them positive feedback, acknowledgement for their accomplishments, their successes? I see you were able to clean your room up all by yourself today. How do you feel about that? Which is not good job. So do we give children positive feedback about their increments of success? And even more subtle, do we give our children feedback about their progress? I see you were able to clean up almost everything on the floor of your room today. So progress. And the even subtler one is, I know you're working really hard to clean up your room by yourself, and I appreciate your efforts. Sometimes, as an other side of the empathy coin, we don't catch children doing something right and their success, their progress, and their efforts. We don't use that acknowledging language, so they don't.
Jonathan, Tanya?
Yeah, we lost him, but I'm here.
Okay, because that was a really important point, and he left.
To wrap up,
Oh.
the focus needs to be on children's success,
Yes.
progress, and efforts. And
Beautiful.
and when we look at that, and it is the other side of the empathy coin.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Sorry,
we got you back.
There he is.
about that.
Yeah. We got you back. That's great. So John, you and I practice this a lot. We teach this everywhere we go. We've had several courses on this reflective listening, because without reflective listening, empathic actions can't really take place and take hold, because remember, we're wanting to understand the other person. We're not trying to fix anything. So John and I, the best way we know how to demonstrate this is to do a little role play. So John, you ready to role play and set the stage?
Here's the situation. I'm the parent or the teacher, and Tanya is a child in my home who has teased one of her siblings like her little sister, and I need to talk with her about that. So I start the conversation. Tanya, I noticed your little sister Patricia was crying, and I know you were talking with her, and then she started crying. What happened, Tanya? Can you tell me what happened?
She was using mean words. She was really mean, and she, and I
Tanya,
don't.
tell me, what kind of mean words was she using to you?
She said I wasn't nice because I took her stuffed animal.
Oh, and how did those mean words make you feel?
I hit her because I felt angry.
Oh, and then after you felt angry and you hit her, and then what happened after that?
Then I started to cry.
Oh, I'm wondering if there is another way when she uses mean words, if you can help her not use mean words without hitting her. Is there another way that you could think to do this?
I could have walked away and covered my ears.
What do you think about that? Do you think that would have worked? Would that have helped you feel better?
Well, I wouldn't have hit her, and that makes me sad.
So if I understand what happened, she was using mean words, and that really hurt your feelings and made you angry, and then you hit her, and then she started crying, but maybe there is another way, like walking away. Is that what you're telling me? Was that the story of what happened?
I think so.
Okay. So that's just a little demonstration there, and I might not have touched upon every single one of those techniques, but the key to empathic or active or reflective listening is to invite the child to keep talking so we continue to better understand their needs and help them come up with, in this case, solutions. It's asking enough questions that build their story or build our understanding through their words.
Do we have any more questions, Lorna, or thoughts from everybody?
Nope, not at the moment, but folks, remember, you're welcome to write anything in any time. You don't have to wait for us to ask.
So we're going to close with a poem by Jack Kornfield, and I believe we're going to close with this. The work of your heart, the work of taking time to listen, to help, is also your gift to the whole of the world.
Wow. Thank you, guys. This was amazing.
Thank you.
I think that the parents and other people who were here today probably got a lot out of this one. I know I did. And I think it's the kind of information that we need at this time in our world. And so thanks, Tanya and John, for being right there with us and reminding us, for some of us, reminding us of what we know. For some of us, giving us some information that we may not have had before. We really appreciate your time and efforts in putting this together.
Thanks for
And
the
I want to thank, John?
Thanks for the invitation, Lorna. Appreciate it. Always love working with you.
Yeah,
very
always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I will put on the second part for people that didn't get to see it. I think most people were able to stay though, so we're glad that you were here. Take care. We'll see you next week.